Hey, welcome to episode 60 of Hollywood Breaks. It's good to be with you today. We're welcoming back one of our favorite guests, Robin Geisen. And we had a conversation today really about cancel culture. We're very motivated by what Dave Chapelle has going on with Netflix and the internal issues they're having there, having a conversation, but really the understanding of what a creative expression might look like and how that plays out in Hollywood and other repercussions that might be there. Robin is an amazing analyst. Keith's an amazing analyst. They have so much to say on this topic. This and other topics we would love to cover today. So please stay tuned and welcome to Hollywood Breaks.
I think there's accountability culture and people should be held accountable for anything that truly is offensive and intended to be offensive. But cancel culture for the sake of canceling somebody because they said something that you disagree with, like I think there's mob mentality, like we were talking about before, and then there's point of view, and somehow the lines have blurred, and that's not fair.
So kind of what we're talking about is the whole thing's happening with Dave Chapelle. But before we get into the specifics of that specific movement, I'm just wondering if you guys are feeling, even just like on this recording, some pressure to change the way you say things, address things differently, because you're afraid that it might come back and haunt you, right?
Yeah. I think that everyone's worried that they're going to say one wrong thing and that they're going to not get a job because of it, or lose a job because of it, or because they said something that just one person at the company disagrees with. Maybe the HR person, or maybe just someone who's super sensitive, or maybe someone who's just looking to be offended, because there seems to be a lot of that these days.
Yeah, because I know I personally. Oh, go ahead, Keith.
No, sorry. I agree with a lot. I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Robin said. I try not to tailor much of what I say, and I try, because I think that's why people tune into this podcast in a lot of ways, because we don't necessarily try to be fluffy or filter anything. But I think, and for all our listeners, I encourage you to go find Bari Weiss's Substack, as well as her podcast, once you subscribe to this one, of course, and go find hers. It's called Honestly with Bari Weiss. And I'm not saying this because she's from Pittsburgh, but that does definitely go in her favor. But she has been an ardent proponent of this, and she wrote a wonderful piece for Commentary magazine that just was unpaywalled, I think, yesterday. And the title of the article is this: we got here because of cowardice. So she's basically saying we are in this current cultural moment with cancel culture, everything, because everyone is scared witless about saying something that's going to offend somebody and it's going to end their careers. We get out of it. This is the second half of the title. We get out of this with courage. And it starts with people like Ted Sarandos at Netflix defending Dave Chapelle. It starts with people like J.K. Rowling defending herself when people come and try to cancel her. It starts with people like Bari Weiss, who quit the New York Times because she was just basically saying Twitter is the editor-in-chief of New York Times.
Yeah, right.
And has started her own independent thing. And there's countless examples of people quitting. There's teachers quitting schools because of critical race theory, and they try to speak out and said, I'm all for bringing in some facets of anti-racism, but this is going too far, and they're pilfered. There are professors resigning, and there's UCLA professor who one of his students, the students emailed him, told him he should start grading the Black students differently because of what was happening over the summer. And he said, absolutely not. And the UCLA basically came after him. They investigated him for that, even though he said, I think this is a violating of the Civil Rights Act. And now he's suing the school. And then you have a mother out in Nevada who is suing her school because the school was forcing them to, each kid to sort of break down their intersection, where they lie on the intersectionality chart. And the kids were like in 5th or 6th grade, and he was a biracial kid. He refused to do it. So they gave him an F. She's suing the school. It starts with people being brave enough to say, okay, this is ridiculous. We can still have a conversation, disagree about how we get there, but we can't just immediately march people out to the digital guillotine and behead them if they say something we don't necessarily agree with.
Well,
Yeah.
I think
let's add some more context to this too, because so the the Las Vegas Raiders coach recently got
weird.
fired. Yeah, recently got fired
Mhm.
from emails that he sent. And I always try to read the original context, and I would admit I haven't read the original context of what was going on here. But I understand the accusation of somebody who truly has a racial bias and is expressing it and would make different decision points in a leadership position is very challenging. And you wouldn't want leadership to have a skew that way. I totally agree with that. But I wonder, like, if there isn't the need for a deeper understanding, because the Dave Chapelle thing that we want to talk about really is this moment where Chappelle, I believe, was saying something very specific, and he truly, in a comedic way, made reference to every demographic, almost to figure out which one's going to come after me, setting himself up, knowing that it might be the transgender thing. So he hit on that the most, and it clearly was the first thing that came out against him. And I think he, in a very clever way, built something up there. And that's the genius of that conversation, is he's trying to say something like, it's not necessarily about feelings, because some of this cancel culture is doing more harm than good, and we should have an understanding of it. But Hollywood has this interesting thing, doesn't it? Because then right afterward, he's performing at the Hollywood Bowl in front of, I don't know, like Brad Pitt or something like that. Like during this whole moment, he actually is not being canceled. People are almost supporting this new conversation that's taking place. And probably if you're a celebrity, you want to have that conversation.
Well, I think with Dave Chapelle, and this is one of the things that, we've all talked about together before. And I think also just with him in particular, like, he's one of the greatest, comedians of all time. And I think I would argue he is. I think he's a brilliant writer. I think he is, he's always bold. It's why he's one of the greatest comedians of all time. I don't think that his intent in any of his stand-ups is to hurt somebody or is to go after somebody or to attack somebody. And in this case, I think that if a lot of the people, the haters that are yelling at him are only yelling at him because they're reading headlines from, the press that's saying one thing, like that Dave Chapelle attacks the trans community, when in fact, I don't think that's what he was doing. I think he was standing up for someone in particular, Daphne Dorman, who's his trans friend in the community. But I think that what he did was pretty thought-provoking, and it shines a mirror back on the public and every one of us, to make us take a step back and look at what it is, what our part in all of this is too. And I think, like, for him, it's like, who's the bad guy here? What he did, he was showcasing the hypocrisy that exists across, everyone. Is it like he can make these, or he can't make these jokes, but when Daphne Dorman goes and stands up for him on her Twitter, she gets viciously attacked. And then, she ends up committing suicide, a week later. And he points out, like, look, I don't know that it was because you guys attacked her, but I'm sure dragging her didn't help. And I think that that's really thought-provoking and something that we should all take a step back at and really think about, intent, because intent matters. And it often gets overlooked, especially in cancel culture. I think everybody's in such a quick hurry to identify with an oppressed group that they end up turning that person or that victim into an object instead of somebody who can actually stand up for themselves and somebody who actually has their own voice too, So
Hollywood's a powerful platform. It always has been, right? The entertainment industry gets people to understand things. And I think there's some very brilliant entertainment that has personally given me some thought-provoking ideas, helped me understand a piece of culture I don't have any exposure to any other way, except for a documentary or a film about a people group. And I think it's fascinating. It's an amazing human experience to go through and be able to watch somebody else or have a different point of view explained to you, or a story told you a certain way. So I like that part. There's clearly agendas of certain filmmakers or television show creators that they are pushing a certain bias that they have. which helps them get their voice heard and other agendas out there. And that's on all sides: conservative, liberal, progressive, non-progressive, whatever your category is. There are all the spectrum is out there.
Totally.
That's why the dialogue exists. But I always believe that Hollywood gave the core of the dialogue. I felt like in my experience, I would go watch a film and then I would take that into a real human conversation I was having. We'll call it the water cooler moment, where when you bring it to work and you say, holy crap, I saw this amazing film last night, and you want to start explaining it, talking to others about it. And I love that part of it. Today, I feel like if you saw something, you're almost afraid to turn it to any community, unless you're even people you're related to. I was going to say unless you're related to them, but even those people you're related to, you don't want to have that conversation with.
Totally.
And I think that's where the change is happening. Is the inability to have that dialogue anymore.
People don't want to offend anybody, and it's almost not even worth it to just say anything. Because you don't want to get attacked.
Well,
and you don't.
And it's not. Is it? I don't want to offend somebody, or that I'm afraid if I offend somebody, they will attack me or publicly shame me before they deal with me directly. Where I know I've offended people in the past, but there was a direct communication to me. I mean, there was an open conversation, so I could say, "Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry." Whatever that learning moment is, I almost feel like we can't learn anymore.
Learning happens precisely because, we do have that dialogue, and that's where it's important. Like, you can't ever beat somebody into submission, to believe what you believe. Right. Like, so now it's a very dangerous place that we're living in right now. It's not, it's unfortunately, it's not. And I don't know, I hope, the economy tends to go, not just economy, but the world in general. I think there's always this pendulum where it goes one way and to the next way. And hopefully this pendulum's starting to swing back. I hope, and maybe Dave Chapelle is that pendulum. I don't know. But
I think it's going to come down to what Mari pointed out in her article. We need people to start standing up to it and having the courage, and the big names that are doing it now because they can afford it. They can stand up because they've got gobs of money and they're never really going to truly be canceled. Right. But there are the smaller communities, smaller people in communities elsewhere. I don't mean smaller, but you know what I mean. Don't necessarily have that cachet to push back. But at the same time, I think a lot of what we're saying now, I think 85 to 90% of people working in Hollywood would agree with everything we're saying. But the problem is they don't really have the courage to stand up to it because, as Tim pointed out, they don't want to be attacked. And because there's no willingness to sit down and have conversations, or people just knee-jerk apologize versus actually explaining what they were trying to accomplish, often leads to the misunderstanding. And then we just go down this rabbit hole of accusatory finger pointing, and then everyone sort of mobs up, and then that person just backs down because they feel they have no choice. A case in point of this, and particularly in the creative space, is Lin-Manuel Miranda after In the Heights, a movie about Spanish Washington Heights and the Puerto Rican community, and he got dragged through the mud because it didn't have accurate representation of the darker skinned Puerto Ricans or something and he just caved in and apologized, and I'm understanding. It's like, dude, you didn't do it on purpose. That wasn't like you purposely, it's just you were telling the story, you didn't have to apologize, just explain, and you would have survived it. But even he, with all his gobs of Hamilton cash, he gives in. And until we get more people that sort of have the courage to stand up to this and sort of push back, and even the smaller spaces, the more people try to engage more with the community and start finding people who are willing to help them to stand up to it, we're never going to get ourselves out of this hole. It's just going to be an ending feed loop. And you go back to sort of Peggy Noonan's column from last week, and she talked a little bit about this. She said people in Hollywood, they love their jobs because they pay so well. And, it's fun to work in Hollywood, and it's fun to make movies. They don't want to lose their jobs. but at the same time, we're sliding into this weird, almost things that 20 years ago, if you would have described it to somebody 20 years ago, they say, well, that can only happen in China and Russia. That's never gonna happen here. And we are literally in the point where people are afraid to say things. They're afraid to do anything because there is
but I'm going to say like
20,
I don't know if 20 years ago is always the greatest moment either. If you're talking about 2000, think about the issues that Ellen was having being an openly gay woman on television. Like that's 20 years ago also. Yeah. So there are issues of 20 years ago.
No, what I'm saying
that
is
we were saying that we want to work through.
Yeah.
Right.
Obviously the idea is that we need to always improve. We're never going to be perfect. And I'm not saying that it was perfect, but my point is 20 years ago, you could still technically offend people, and it wasn't looked upon as like violence.
It was, the dialogue was open, is what I think it is. So that 20 years ago, because of what Ellen brought to the stage, we had an open dialogue and progress.
And Will and Grace, for example, that
that
opened the doorway. Like, so
well, here's what I think Hollywood's choice is, though, in response, is that we're actually not making any progress in the entertainment industry at all, right? Because we're now new ideas or genuine ideas or things that are open for conversation just aren't happening, and then we're stuck with the good old simple storylines, repeated stories over and over and over again that don't really show any advancement of a creative field. It just shows the commoditization of something we already think is safe. And I think that Hollywood now is kind of stuck in a rut of what is the next big entertainment or creative movement that we have.
Yeah. I mean, look, I just want to say one thing about all of this too, because I do think that Keith is right, that it is about us having the courage, but I also think that it's about our news media and all of these outlets who have this power, these platforms, they need the news media. I mean, it's almost time to reintroduce the fairness doctrine. You know what I mean? Like when you think about, because everyone's trying to get the headline, and instead of actually telling you what the story is, they're telling you some clickbait in order to get you to engage with it. Right. And who can be the most bold, who can be like, I want them to read my column, or I want them to stay. If you're Twitter, I want you to keep engaging with my content, or Facebook, right? Which is what Facebook is getting in trouble for right now with the whistleblower. And honestly, I think they should be getting in trouble for that. Like, and this is where, and it kind of relates to us too. And we've been having this issue in entertainment with these tech companies forever, where we've been asking for transparency. Like, what are we paying for exactly when we're paying for advertising on your platforms? Like, what exactly are we getting here? How many times are you recommending this video over this video? I want to see the transparency there. And I think that I mean, I was saying this to you guys before, that Tristan Harris does this podcast called Your Undivided Attention, which you guys should do like a mutual podcast with them. It would be great.
Introduce us.
Yeah, make it happen.
Well, I don't know him, but I would love to know him and meet him, because I think he's brilliant. And but he also worked on The Social Dilemma, and he's pointing out, how all of these companies are enraging in order to engage, which is not healthy. And it is much of the reason why we're in this culture that we're in today, is because, and they have no responsibility. They're taking no responsibility for it. They're just saying, we're letting the people say what they want to say, and we don't want to censor anybody because it's free speech. But there's a difference between free speech and free reach. And they're right. And it's really fascinating to take an in-depth dive there on that and watch. That's why I say watch The Social Dilemma, because it really is fascinating and it really highlights it for you. But also the news media, Keith, to your point, like, we all need to be braver, and we all need to stand up for what we're saying, and also say, that's not what I intended, and like, stop it right there. Cause that's not, these are the conversations we should be having, and we should be able to have grace and empathy and forgiveness for anybody who says, everybody says something, the wrong thing. Everybody says something they want to take back. Sometimes they want to take back a lot of things that they say, or they're not as articulate as they want to be. Like, but that doesn't mean that they're not, it doesn't mean they should get canceled for something that comes out of their mouth if they're just trying to talk. Like that's just not.
Yeah, I don't know if you
place
guys saw the Joe Rogan Sanjay Gupta interview. It's really interesting because you have two people on different sides of a political agenda having a really great conversation, by the way. When we're talking about the dialogue and conversation that's necessary,
Yeah.
I think what Joe Rogan and Sanjay did was great.
Yep.
But there's an interesting moment where Joe Rogan is saying to Sanjay, like, it wasn't exactly what he said, but it was along the lines like, you're the head medical advisor, the head medical face on a news network. And your news network said that I was taking horse dewormer, not medicine, but horse dewormer.
Yeah.
And I wasn't, dude. He says, I can freaking afford human medicine. And I was taking human medicine prescribed by a doctor.
Oh, dear.
And your network. And Sanjay's like, no, not exactly. He's like, dude, your network was saying it to manipulate people to believe this stuff. And you have, and it was awesome. He just called him out. And I love that there's a platform that allows for that. Yeah. And that's like, we couldn't have, this is what we love about what's happening, is that the technology is allowing Joe Rogan to have a platform that is not necessarily censored. I think it's no longer on YouTube because YouTube censors them, but it's on Spotify. But it allows the voice of Joe Rogan to be pushed out there. Yeah.
Let me take that and put it into context too for our listeners, is like, so what comes out of that interview? If you're a, super left-leaning outlet, is Joe Rogan taking horse tranquilizers? Right? That's your headline. Versus a very right-wing outlet saying the left is accusing Joe Rogan of taking horse tranquilizers. Like they're saying the same thing.
Robin,
they're
it's
not
even better
thing,
than that,
right?
Because if you're on a right side, they say Joe Rogan takes down Sanjay in CNN.
You're
but
right.
Then the next day after this interview, Sanjay is on CNN being interviewed by a CNN anchor about his conversation with Joe Rogan. And they say, what a great job you did explaining to Joe Rogan how the medicine really works.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing was that Sanjay said was, I had to talk to him for 3 hours. And it's really difficult to talk for 3 hours. That's the CNN scoop of this conversation that took place.
Right.
They weren't even
it's not
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely
just watch it. Just watch the interview yourself. You can.
Yeah. Everyone
I just
retreats.
the news, by the way. Yeah.
Everyone just retreats to their bias, and it is the way that the cable networks are set up and the way everything works. It's like, why do people have to choose between Rachel Maddow or Laura Ingraham? Like, why? Like, why? Yeah. And you don't have to necessarily. Like, the good news is there are a lot of platforms out there. And like I said, Barry Weiss has a great Substack. Glenn Laurie and John McWhorter have a wonderful podcast.
Oh, I love John McWhorter. He's so good.
And if they were as famous as like Ibram Kendi, who knows where we'd be in this whole conversation. But the bottom line is people just retreat. And I think, again, there has to be a little bit of responsibility on us as a culture to sort of pull back and say, why are we letting these ideologues drive the conversation?
Right.
And again, it goes back to their, a lot of the institutions that drive the culture right now have been completely overrun by the woke left. And there's just a lack of any sort of courageous leadership to say, whoa, enough of that. We got to slow the roll here. We're going a little bit, this is a little bit off the rails, and nobody wants to do that. And again, it goes back to there being a little bit of courage. And I don't really know what the solution is. I don't think it's like, let's bring back the fairness doctrine, to counter your point, Robin. I don't think that's the solution. I think it's got to be a little bit responsibility sort of on us in our communities, and start focusing on local issues. Stop nationalizing every little thing that happens and make it like a big to-do. Focus on working on your smaller communities. And you see that and some of the school board meetings that are happening. More people are getting engaged locally. That's what needs to happen. You get away from listening to what Laura Ingraham and Rachel Maddow say, and just find for yourself. Like, go out and find the information for yourself. I know it's easier said than done, but that is part of being in this country. You have to take responsibility for for where you find your news, and you have to, there has to be a little bit of responsibility on us. Like, me, as I'll give myself an example, just to say I'm not sitting here, on my high horse. I don't let my kids watch TV much. I don't let them play with my phone. I don't let them near iPads because I know how toxic that stuff is. So I keep them away from it. But it starts there. And
neither does Robin. Robin's baby does not watch. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, she's 7 months, so she's not watching a lot of anything these days.
Yeah.
But no, my 4-year-old.
But what I'm saying is that's where it starts. It starts with simple things like that. It's going out. It's engaging with your neighbors again. I was having a conversation with my mom just yesterday, and she's like, I go to parties and the parents stay sometimes. She's like, I can't even, like when you was your, I just drop you off and go, or you just go outside and play and hang out with the neighborhood kids. That doesn't happen anymore. We got to get away from that. I mean, Crash, which was a movie that was made, 15 years ago, is all about LA and the fact that nobody talks to each other in LA. Yeah. Because it's like everyone's in a little hovel and until you just, and then it explodes.
Right. Well, there's ideology and there's identity. And I think that's where people think if somebody's ideology, they're thinking that their ideology is the same as their identity, and it's not. Just because somebody has a point of view on something doesn't mean that's who they are. So, but the people think that it's an attack on who they are just because it's an attack on something that they believe, right? So then everybody ends up kind of fighting against each other. And there's we need to have empathy again. We need to take a step back. And I think to me, it's all about intent. And I agree, the community thing is so important. And I was saying, like, if you're watching YouTube and you're watching these videos and look, they're trying to keep you on there. That's why they keep feeding you all the content that you're watching. And if you're watching, I use this example, like, let's say you're a volleyball aficionado and you're watching volleyball videos and they feed you a video, they'll feed you something that's like this outlandish, crazy volleyball video of somebody getting hit in the face or watch this person get taken out by this volleyball. And you just sit there and keep watching because they want to keep you online so that they can, sell their advertising space and make money. It's all about money. But instead, like, where's that healthy, like, if you're that platform, you have to take that role of, I think you'd have to take that role personally. I think that's the right thing to do. I understand that doesn't help their business, but it could help their business if they find healthy ways to have people engage with their content. And that's where I say, like, have something on the side that say, oh, you like volleyball? Here's all the volleyball games that are happening in your neighborhood this week. Here's how to join a volleyball team in your community this week. Use your actual geolocation for something that's helpful versus something that's like, and that helpful stuff makes money too, by the way. Like, there's ways to do it and still make money, like, but to be ethical about it. But that's, that takes more time. So we only have
a few minutes left, but both you two are analysts. You advise filmmakers, creators, actors in this field to take on certain projects, market those projects, get the voice out there. With this in mind, and obviously the context of other parts of Hollywood that are shifting and changing, what's your angle on helping people make a choice of creating content nowadays? Would you recommend, or do you guys feel boldish enough to recommend that Dave Chapelle go on and make the piece that he made? Would that be something you would be willing to support and accept the backlash for it? And you think that studios should continue that stuff, or do you feel like there is a different strategic play to be played out in today's environment?
Well, so I'll go first. I think it's two separate things. So number one, I think filmmakers and actors and actresses, I don't think anyone should be stopped from making any story they want to tell. Like, I think that we need to hear every story that's out there. That to me is why I got into movies. I love storytelling and I love the movies. I can't get enough of that. I don't think that needs to change. I absolutely recommend that if someone has an idea that they're passionate about, that they should explore it. But to take it to a theater versus taking it to streaming versus taking it to, what distribution outlet, I think that is where the conversation is. And it becomes like, what is this worthy of going to a theater? And I don't know if it's even worthy, because that's not the right way to say it, because that implies that streaming content isn't which isn't, right? Like I think there's good content for streaming and there's good content for theatrical, but that's where distribution nowadays, theatrical distribution, needs to redefine that movie going experience so that we need to, and to me, redefining it means like, what's an event and what isn't? It doesn't mean that only Marvel movies go to theaters. It means event movies go to theaters. So like Halloween this weekend. Halloween is a complete event. It's opening up this month, leading into Halloween, like 2 weeks going into it. Like that's an event. And it obviously showed. It showed at the box office. People came, right?
But that sounds like, Robin, you want the leadership to be bold as well. So you're asking for bold leadership in Hollywood to be willing to put information out there, but also means changing the scorecard. We're not just looking at blockbuster numbers or total gross receipts. There's got to be other ways of recognizing and understanding the scale of entertainment and its impact. So that's what your request is. It's like you're advising creators to push it, and then advising leaders to kind of accept it and be willing to roll with the punches.
Oh, I'm advising creators to create and based off of their passion on whatever they want to make. And I'm advising leadership to take a look at whatever it is, all of the content that they have, and decide what outlet is best for it. Look, this is where marketing.
But be bigger than a cancel culture, or be bigger than low box office numbers for something you weren't expecting. Like be bigger than just the basic scorecards out there. Like know what your long-term agenda is and be able to live by it.
Find ways to deal. To me, cancel culture is just another challenge in the marketplace, right? Like it's what I was saying with Pepe Le Pew on our last podcast. They ran from that. When I actually, as a marketer, saw that as a complete blessing, and I would have taken it the complete opposite direction and found an opportunity to create a new character in Pepe Le Pew and make something that's more fun with it. And that's actually, that to me that's the fun of marketing, right? Like there's challenges everywhere on every single movie.
One of my favorite examples, all recent thing, Pepe Le Pew is not in the film, but the Clockwork Orange guys are in the film. That is, right.
Space Jam?
Yes.
Yes.
What do you say, Keith? Space Jam. Like,
so I echo a lot of what Robin says. I agree that it's all about the venue. I have conversations every day about where should I pitch my project? Is this a theatrical play? Is it a streaming play?
Right.
But one thing I would push back on is the idea that telling any story, and all stories should be told. That is not going to happen in today's Hollywood. It's just not. That's just the reality of leadership right now. They are not, it's like what I just referenced earlier. They're scared out of their wits to lose their job. They don't want to take any risks. So that's why a lot of the entertainment is feeling rote. It feels like it's the same thing over and over again. That's why you get only big Marvel movies like Venom, and you're getting the retreads of things from the 90s. And that's why certain outlets like Daily Wire are popping up, because they went and made a movie with Gina Carano, who was fired from The Mandalorian because she tweeted something. She apologized for it, but she got eviscerated and destroyed for it.
Yeah.
And Disney was the executor of that sort of public shaming. So again, it's like, I echo, and I love, you're right. You're 100% right.
I'm saying they should.
The great thing about movies is the storytelling, but the storytelling is always, until we shake ourselves from this whole sort of cancel culture, sort of mob mentality, that's not going to happen. People are just going to continually make the same stories that are not going to offend. And if they do make a story that's a little controversial, it's always going to make sure that it keeps the Twitter mob happy. Now,
here's what I would argue that they are making content, hence Dave Chapelle, happening right now in front of us.
That's one person. That's one. And we don't even know if that's going to hold, because both Reed and Ted are getting raked through the coals.
True.
We'll see if they hold. I don't know if they're going to hold. They might not hold. If they do, kudos to them. But that's one company. One.
Right. Well, that's where
And-
what Ted is doing is total opposite of what HBO Max is doing, which is like supporting the
Yes.
creator, backing them up, understanding the context, and saying, no, this is a creative venue, opposed to like just giving in,
Right.
catering in, and going for like
And
protecting
by the
themselves
way,
from Wall Street.
just to go back to your Pepe Le Pew example, that was brought up by a New York Times columnist. And immediately HBO Max, one guy wrote a column about Pepe Le Pew and rape
Being
culture.
offensive.
And they pulled it. And that's where I go, like, there's no courage there. There's no courage. They're not going to say, like, this guy, okay,
I know.
that's his opinion. We're
Yeah.
not, it's a cartoon. Relax. But that's why I push back a little bit on your the idea that maybe, oh, well, they don't want to just tell stories. Well, guess what? There's one company that seems to be willing to buck the trend. One. And that's it. So until that changes a little bit, and I would also argue cancel culture is it's more than just a market issue. I think it goes deeper than that.
Oh,
But
I agree.
I think until there is, again, I mean, I'm hammering Barry Weiss's column, but until there's courageous leadership,
Right.
this is not going to change. So what I usually tell my clients, and I go back to, I reference this quite often because it's so brilliant, it goes to Tim's advice of like just knowing your audience, figuring out who the audience. Don't just show up and say, I want to make this. I'm like, okay, well, whoa. What is the context of this? Who's the audience for this? And then let's figure out where that audience is. If it's something that you feel could do really well, sort of opening small and then going big, or something that maybe plays better on, in the middle of the country versus the coast, then maybe you start there. So, I mean, there's opportunities for sure, but until there is a real sort of shift and sort of a realization that, yes, there are stories that everyone's story should be told, but until there's a way of circumventing the current Hollywood system, and I think, again, as I said, I think Daily Wire's moving down that road of, pulling back and pushing back against sort of the studio monoliths. I think we're not going to see that much drastic change in sort of the movies and the content we see. So
I mean, I agree. I agree with everything you said. I think that the only thing I would say is like, this is an opportunity for Hollywood to
exactly,
to take the reins. And also like, I don't think everything has to be political either. Like that's where, and it shouldn't be, right? Like that's why people are going to see Venom, is because they just want to escape, right? But I think, I do think that maybe there's something to be said. I mean, this is a huge culture change. That's a giant culture change. And that can be movie going's part, or movie theaters and movie studios, not movie theaters, but movie studios and creators. Like that's their part in all of this. What's your role in the culture that is happening right now? And just like it could be with news, like to me, instead of having a left-wing outlet and the right-wing outlet just attacking each other, let's have one outlet with both people to actually talk about it. And I don't know, maybe that could be a good idea. Maybe that's a good idea. I don't know.
And I think you're hitting on it.
Well,
the alternative is to segment out everything, right? Which is what we're doing right now, because the platforms allow for such a broad release. Anybody that has an internet connection, as we know, we're doing it right now. The internet connection can make a piece of content.
Yeah.
So we segment things out, and therefore you just have piles of different agendas and different influences pushing against each other, instead of trying to open up a conversation that might be something different. But I also think that the makers in the studios need to recognize what the play out is of this. Because if we keep on segmenting things out, and you only, Keith, to your point, the way you advise your clients is to recognize like there are specific markets, and we want to hit those markets specifically because you're making content for them. But I also want those segments to not be too pushed to one extreme to the other, so that the other side doesn't get a chance to hear it. And I think back in the day of just three television networks, three television channels, we kind of, too much was not ever broadcast, right? Husband and wife sleeping in separate beds is also a very odd cultural expression of how humans actually are. But so it could be too conservative and too censored when it's too small of a demographic. But if it's too broad and too wide, we also never hear each other. And I think that's the fear. So it is interesting thing to navigate nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting that we bring that up, because I think if you pull back, and it's just because I talked about Laura Ingraham and Rachel Maddow. So Rachel Maddow averages what? I'm guessing here. These numbers could be wrong.
I don't know.
1.9 to 2 million people maybe a night, and someone like Tucker Carlson's like 2.3, 2.4 million. That's like 4.5 million people out of 350 million people in this country. Yet that drives so much of what we talk about on a regular basis. And I think that's part of the problem, obviously. And, you could say Twitter's not real world, but guess what? It kind of is, because it drives a lot of the culture conversations we have. And it's because there are people just literally sitting there.
Well, I'm also going to say, like that Tucker Carlson, the two people that you just chose, and you're right. Those are the two people who are represented. So you were right to choose those two people. But they're also two of the most angry people on both sides, right?
That's very true.
And so
yes.
think about why we're feeling that way, right? Like why are we putting the two most angry people instead of someone who's objective, who has empathy? Because neither one of them have empathy for the other side at all.
Well, but would anybody watch, Robin? That's the question. As much as we both desire something like that, the question then is would the AI allow that to be seen and pushed to the front of people's news feeds, right? That's the first thing. Do the algorithms reward that kind of motivation anyway?
But therein lies the problem. Like we're rewarding horrible behavior.
Yes.
And that's where
I think it takes more of a bold move of a real human stepping in, Ted Sarandos stepping in, saying, I'm an actual human being. I can actually watch a piece of content. I understand what the expressive nature was. It's a creative movement, and I'm not allowing a small demographic that has a better AI to promote that voice over anything else to rule right now. Even though, like inside of Netflix, there should be the conversation going to take place too. I guarantee it. Right? There's going to be more conversations as part of this. Like, what are we giving into, and how are we allowing this to take place? But that's how a healthy culture grows. Yeah, it's tricky, and I don't necessarily. I'm not necessarily jealous of the jobs that you guys have to do in advising people and helping navigate through this stuff. I think these are the decision points we have of like, I get where I want to go in the future. I also understand what the context is at the moment. And if I'm making a film and making an investment and want to make any progress, maybe baby steps are better than nothing at all. But baby steps are not as great as big steps. So we want everything. We want everything to happen right now. And I think there are these. That's why people hire you guys. We need the strategy to navigate through all these more complicated decisions. We never even got to the IATSE. We never got to the IATSE strike. There's so many things we could talk about. Robin, you inspired.
What are you gonna do?
We just need hours of Robin. That's what we need.
Hours and hours.
Let's do this. Bond looks to cross 100 million today. Yay, go Bond. Hopefully people will continue to come out and see it. Halloween, yay, north of 50 million. That's tremendous and wonderful for any horror genre. I think that's great. Good things. Those are good things happening. Maybe there's light at the end of this COVID tunnel. Who knows?
That's great.
Maybe.
Trying to be optimistic.
Keith, Robin got a speed round. You get a speed round. 10 seconds. What are the things that we didn't cover today that you want us to give shout out to?
She got a lot of them, actually. I mean, obviously it's great. IATSE strike avoided. We'll see if I've heard rumblings that the membership's not entirely thrilled. So we'll see how this shakes out. But I think it's a good thing for the business that this strike has been avoided.
Totally.
And hopefully this, again, I echo. And I'll say one more thing about Halloween. 50 million, and it was day and date on Peacock, and Peacock was #1 on Apple iTunes downloads. So obviously a great day for Donna Langley and Universal. So
yay, go Universal, go Uni. We love you guys. That's great news.
My 10 seconds is I saw James Bond, great film. Everyone should see it. I saw it in IMAX. It was awesome, even though Keith has ruined my theater going experience because I smelled popcorn the entire time. And his voice was in my head the entire time.
Oops.
But great film. I still have questions about why we keep grabbing 1990s content and bringing it into 2020. I think I'm going to be harping on this as much as bad Netflix movies for the next 5 years until someone figures out we do not need to recreate the 1990s. We need more of what Dave Chapelle is doing. We need things that are understanding and things that are pushing us forward and making us listen. So
I appreciate you guys. Everybody just needs to have good, let's have some good juju, right? Like people need to have good good vibes against each other. Always look on the bright side of life.
Thank you. And on that
Just
note,
hated myself.
All right, thank you both. It's been awesome.
Thank you for
we should
having me,
just do
guys.
hours of this on a regular basis because you guys are incredible.
indeed.
And if you like what you saw today, please feel free to subscribe, tell your friends about us. If you hate what you heard today, please, Robin's direct email address is, no, just kidding. But please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you, and we want to hear
Please
more
don't
of
do
it.
that.
Robin, it's great to have you aboard. We love it. And
Thanks for
keep your
having me,
smile
guys.
going. We appreciate you. Keith, until next week, we have more guests coming up, so stay tuned. And
Indeed we
I
do.
need to thank those people behind the scenes that are helping us all the time. We have Lydia, who produces the show for us. We appreciate you. The Go Social team is always doing something else for us, making great things happen, push those images. So we want to thank them. Connor, for the research that you do for us. And I'm missing somebody. Lydia, who am I missing? Anyways, if I missed you, I wanted to
Michelle.
thank you too. Michelle, thank you very much for the help and support you have. Actually, Lydia's team is amazing, by the way. So Lydia, all that you have going on. So we'll see you all next week, and thank you for watching Hollywood Breaks.
Thank you.